Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Q&A Cafe for Business by Design. Today we are going over reporting Excel add-on with Alex Waddell. And next Wednesday, the June 24th, we'll be going over workflow in ByDesign. So if you're interested, please register off of our website in the resources page. Scroll all the way down and you'll find the full registration table as well. And just a reminder, we'll be recording this session, so everyone will be on mute for the session. So if you have any questions or comments, just place them in the questions or the chat box, and we'll get to them after the presentation portion of this session. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Alex, and I will mute myself.
Great, thanks, Kayla. So as Kayla mentioned, my name is Alex Waddell. I'm a ByDesign consultant with VistaView, and I specialize in finance. So I'm quite familiar with the reporting, especially financial reporting. In today's session, we'll look at the Excel add-on. I did a report training in prior weeks where we focused on just some of the functionality around building basic reports, understanding views and selections, and combining them in order to create reports. And we'll kind of start there where we finished in that last session, and then pick up with how you could also run those same reports in Excel. And in order to do that, so we will be running, Excel has an add-on, or ByDesign specifically has built an add-on for Excel, which will add these additional panels, and all of that is invoked through a ribbon that is specifically to SAP Business ByDesign. If you don't currently have that installed in your Excel, you will of course need to have administrator rights or have your IT department assist you with that. Where can you get that add-on? You can go to your home work center in SAP, and if you go into your self-services, there is an install additional software link, and when you click on that, it's going to open up a panel, and in here are the various different add-ons for ByDesign, and this is the one that we use quite heavily. And so you use this not only for reportings, but also if you're doing some of the uploading functions like uploading journal entry vouchers from Excel, you'll also need the same add-on. So likely if you are a ByDesign user, you already have this installed, but I just wanted you to be aware of that if you weren't sure how to get the add-on installed. So with that, let's head right into the reporting. Before we go into Excel, I just wanted to remind you of some of the concepts inside the add-on so that you can kind of see how that transitions into Excel. So for that, I'm going to focus on, I'll probably just choose one report that I find very useful, which is the GL detail. So I'm going to go and look at my priority reports, go to my GL account line balances. And as you recall, or maybe you've never seen this before, so we'll run through it really quickly, but when you're building a report, the report is a combination of selections and views. So keep in mind that the selection is the criteria. So really this is the when and the what that you want to see in your report. And so for example, if I want to filter on specific companies, I would go in here and filter that information. And we're just going to build a selection really quickly here. So I'm going to build one maybe for, and actually we'll do a relative value. So we'll do the current fiscal year. And remember that you've got absolute values and relative values. This is probably especially relevant in the Excel, because if you are using an Excel workbook to create, month-end financial statements, wherever possible, you want to use relative values so that each time when you open up that workbook, you can just refresh the report and get the current fiscal year or the current fiscal period. Whereas if you build your selections with absolute values, when you refresh that report, you won't see any updates for fields where you have set absolute values, which may or may not be useful to you. And in this case, let's also filter a certain number of GL accounts. So let me just grab my 5 accounts. So I'm going to grab quite a few of them. So that's all of my P&L accounts. And I'm just going to start that, see what it looks like. So we'll do a quick trial run here. And so that's great. I'm getting a bunch of data, 2 pages worth. You can see at the bottom here. And so remember that selections and views can be saved. So in order to invoke a previous save selection, your drop down is here. In order to save one, you click on your little disk icon. We could do a save as. And so remember, name your selections in your views so that they're relevant to what you've built here. So I'm going to say company 1000, current year, all 5X accounts. So that kind of covers it all, right? That's what this particular selection is doing. And now if we go into the views are really the how do you want this report to look? So which specific fields are we going to be showing? And do we want them in the rows or the columns? So for example, and one reason I like this report is because it's got a large data set to it. So if you are doing like a GL analysis, as accountants are often doing, this is typically the report that you want to be running. So for example, if I were to take this report and add, let's say, profit center maybe. And then maybe let's take our profit center and move it to the top so that we're kind of subtotaling inside of our profit center. So now we're seeing everything for headquarters Cleveland with all of that other data. And so let's take this view and also save it. So this is going to be PL detail by profit center. Okay, so let's jump into Excel. You'll see shortly there was a reason I spent some time in here because I want you to understand that work that you do either in Excel or inside ByDesign completely transfers once you're connected to the databases. So what I'm showing you here is an Excel workbook that I had built out previously. And this is sort of a financial reporting package. And so this is a very useful way that the Excel add-on can benefit your organization. So if you do have a bunch of different reports, just like Excel, you can have an unlimited number of tabs. And each of those tabs could contain a report or multiple reports if you like. So in this case, I have, elimination reports, I have balance sheets, I have income statements, I have my Canadian and my US financials. I have, different kinds of hierarchy reports. But before we come back and kind of run through those, let's just start the way you'd probably be starting, which is with a brand new sheet. So I'm going to insert a new sheet into my workbook. And let's just call this GL detail. And the first thing that I'm going to do once I've installed my add-on is I'm going to log into my environment. So can't insert any reports unless you're connected to your database. So make sure that your URL matches your URL for the environment that you're connecting to. You could potentially connect to your test environment or your production environment. So you can always just highlight up to the .com in your URL if it's the first time you're connecting, and paste that in here. Once you've logged in once, it'll remember this address, and then all you have to do each time you log in is put in your username and password. So if you're wondering how do you know if you're connected, when you look up at the top left, you'll see a little green circle, and that indicates that you are connected to a live SAP environment. Now at this point, I'm going to click on the Insert Report button. I will talk a little bit about what I see as sort of the strengths and weaknesses inside each of these. So very similar functionality, but some of the things that are a little bit different or unusual is when you invoke your report list. This is showing you all of the reports that you have access to. And the reason you are seeing duplicates is because you have access to reports through multiple work centers. You likely may not see as many reports as I do because I'm logged in as a super user into the system. So feel free to type in the report that you're looking for. So if I'm looking for my GL account line items report, does not matter which one of these I run. I'm running the exact same report. It's just telling me that it's available from any work center. It doesn't matter which one I run it from. Now, as soon as I insert my work center, it's going to invoke those selections and views, and I have the ability now to manipulate the system as I want. So you can see that if I drop down on the list of my views and my selections, all of the information that I have in ByDesign is also available to me in Excel. So this particular view, hopefully this looks familiar to you. This is the one that I just created. So this is Company 1000, current year, all 5X accounts. If we pop back into SAP, exactly the same list of accounts that we have here. And the same thing with my views. So I believe I had called that, it's getting a little bit bogged down, but I said GL detail by profit center, so it's that one right there. So once I invoke that, I'm now looking at the exact same report data in this one here. So either way, completely up to you how you want to run this report. And you could alternatively build this report completely in Excel, as in modify your selections and views. So I'm going to show you that shortly. Just a quick reminder, as Kayla mentioned, if you have any questions as we're going, feel free to drop those into the chat or the question panel inside the webinar. I will address all of your questions, but if you want to put them in now as they pop into your head, feel free to do that, and I'll keep an eye on any questions that come up. So once we're inside this report view, the look and the feel is quite a bit different, but the mechanics work the same. So very similar. So this is our view panel, and your panels can be hidden and invoked as you need. So you can see my selection panel is not available to me. If there's a panel that I want to see, I click on the very last icon on the right here, which is my show hide, and then I can turn on any one of those other panels. So if I want my selections showing, there's my selection panel. Once again, just to compare that to SAP. So all of those same fields that I have in my selection panel there are available in this panel here. Now, in my experience, trying to update selection criteria here by invoking some of these buttons can cause some problems. I don't know if that's specific to certain hardware or if it's just an issue with the Excel add-on. So I am curious if you have issues with that, if you are ever running these Excel reports. I do sometimes find, especially if I'm working with a really large parameter like this one, where my GL accounts, because in this case, I could be invoking, you know, hundreds or dozens of data parameters. So if you are having issues with that, I sometimes find it easier to work with large parameters inside here because it works very well inside the ByDesign HTML. And sometimes the pop-up for Excel can take a long time. So I won't even click on that now because I'll probably get a timed window and it might take a long time to pop it up. So just giving you a warning about that. That's probably the main sort of deficiency of working in Excel. Otherwise, it's going to be very similar. But you can feel free to, if you know your parameters, you can type them right in here. So rather than invoking the pop-ups, you can always just type in, you know, additional company numbers, change your parameters here, just type it in exactly as it would be in the other system. So that's completely up to you. You have the save button. So if you do make changes to your save selections, you can pop that up, and this works in both directions. So where I created a save selection in the ByDesign application, it's available in Excel. I could do the same thing here. I could make changes to my parameters, save this as a new selection, and when I go back into SAP, it'll be available to run in that direction as well. And that works out quite well. So for now, I'm just going to minimize, remove this panel because it does take up quite a bit of real estate. So just remember, if you need that back, you go to the hide and show. If you ever accidentally, you know, get rid of all of them because you need the column space, you can always come back and reopen any one of those. Now, working inside our views, this works very similar to an Excel pivot table. This is also the same mechanics as in here. So when I go into my view, it looks a little differently because here I have to pop up my window of available fields. Instead, in Excel, all of those available fields are sitting here. They're just non-checked. So the same sort of idea. So if there is something that I want to add to this information or even remove, I could do that in here. So let me take out some information like, and you could also take this information from the panel down here. It's kind of like an Excel pivot table, if you're used to those. So that rather than going and looking for the box that's checked, you could just take information and sort of drag it off the screen. I find that a little bit easier. And you also have the ability to do your search here too. So if there is a specific field you're searching for, let's say business partner. Now, if you click the field versus dragging it, it's going to assume that you want to add it to the rows, which is what it's done here. So it's added my business partner as my rows selection. If I want to make a change between what's showing in my rows and my columns, it's also a click and drag inside ByDesign, but you can do the same thing in Excel. So let's say I want to take my profit centers and move it over to my columns, click and hold and drag and release, and that brings it over to my columns. So now I've got a very different report than what I started, which was called my GL detail by profit center. And maybe actually I want to take my profit center and I want to move it up above my debits and credits so my totals look a bit better. So now I've got inside each profit center my total debits and my total credits, and then my next profit center with total debits and credits. So that's a bit more of an interesting report. If I want to change this, if I keep in mind, and these icons are kind of small, so do be careful with this. If you hover your mouse over it, if I were to just click the save button, it is going to overwrite this previously created view with these new parameters. That's not exactly what I might want to happen. I probably want to give this a new name. So now I'm going to call this accounts by business partner with profit center columns, whatever makes sense to you, right? So then I'm going to save that view. And so now we're working with this new view. And then once you're back in here, that view will be available. And it might take a moment for it to get over into the SAP, but you will see it in this list here as well. So that works in either direction. Other things that you have available to you, so inside your SAP reporting, you might be familiar with using fields like the ellipses here to get to your more, and you can do things like get to your characteristic settings. So do you want to show both the ID and the description? Do you want subtotaling to happen, yes or no? So if you want to make those sorts of changes in Excel, where that's located is when you're highlighting the particular field, you will see that field showing below and you will get access to that same information there. So if, for example, on this profit center for our show results, we want to say do not show results, I can choose that. And then that has just removed the subtotaling I had on my profit centers. And if I wanted to do the same thing for my business partners, and sorry, that subtotaling was actually on the end here. So maybe let's go and turn that back on so you can see that difference. So it's just populated my totals because that's my column totals, but maybe let's go to my business partner and say, let's remove the results. And so now that gives us more of a grid. So it's removed those orange highlighted rows where we previously had totals. And for our business partner information, so you have here show ID and description. If you wanted to say just show as description, you can make that change. So it hides the ID column, so we now lose column number 2. So all of that is available to you as well. Talked a little bit about adding the fields back. There is also a settings access here. So all of these settings that you're seeing in here are the same settings that you would find in SAP under this settings button. So the types of settings that are typically useful is, for example, do you want to see repeated text? So that's a setting that we commonly like to have if you're doing exports to Excel. So we don't have any blank spaces here where you have to then later on try and copy down in Excel. Another setting that you might like to use is hierarchy settings. None of this information here is really relevant to a hierarchy, but if you're running, for example, an income statement where you want potentially your GL account hierarchy to be invoked in here, or you want a profit center hierarchy to be invoked, then you can do those settings. So that same information is available here from these settings. So there's your hierarchies, whether you want to arrange things in rows and columns, whether you want to invert hierarchies, that can be useful on income statements, suppression of zeros, things like that. So all of that is available to you here. Let's talk maybe a little bit about some of the advantages to putting things in Excel versus, so one of the big ones is you can now have additional augmented data outside of your table, and that can be useful at times as well. So I'm not going to write a complicated formula, but maybe you would write something fairly complicated like a sum if or something like that, but let's just do a quick sum here. So one thing to keep in mind, if you are tying in other data points outside of this grid, and this report is something you're going into and running each month, then this grid is dynamic and it's constantly resizing. So when you come into a system and you reopen a report, that report a month from now is going to have a different number of rows because it's relating to a different number of journal entries in this new period. In order to see that change in that information, you would hit that refresh button. So the refresh button is going to make sure that your connection is valid. It's going to reach into the system. And if you are running relative parameters like current fiscal year, like I have here, this data undoubtedly is going to change, and that could impact what you have in this information here. So maybe to simulate that, let's go back to putting in something like the journal entry field. So I have just added a field which has significantly increased the number of rows in my report, and that's fine because my formula sort of bumped down with it. But what it also did is it added a column because I'm asking a new column of information. So now this formula is no longer really aligned anymore. So that is something that is manageable as long as you are writing your formulas and then really keeping your selections rigid, so you're not constantly changing the number of columns. If you are constantly pivoting and analyzing that data, that's not a data set that you want to then draw connections to outside of the grid. Otherwise, you're going to run into problems like this where my formula suddenly becomes meaningless. That said, it's still a powerful feature. You could have reports that are fairly static as far as their columns, and maybe it's reaching in and it's grabbing a certain piece of information that you need to, report to business users, and it's just something that needs to be augmented with additional data outside of the system, number of head count or things like that. If you're doing budget analysis, you want commentary. So now you have all that flexibility of having, real estate on your Excel spreadsheet that can be unrelated to this grid, but can also tie into your report where needed. So that's really the mechanics of creating the same report inside the system. Maybe what I'll do is spend a few minutes just talking. I'll run you through some of these sample reports I've created in the past. And if you are already, an Excel ByDesign report user, you might get some new ideas from these. So I'm just going to run through some of these reports that I've created in the past. So this report is a financial consolidation. One thing that I like about running these reports in Excel is if I do have something that's hierarchical in nature. So for example, the income statement has a hierarchy that's associated with your functional area reporting roles. Because that is a hierarchy, when they bring it into Excel, they've automatically invoked Excel's capability to do roll-ups. So that's kind of a nice feature. You can have this report in here, and you can quickly click on, your roll-up groups up here to see your roll-ups. I find that works a little bit better than in ByDesign, because in ByDesign you kind of have to reach a little deeper into the settings to determine what level, and it's not quite as graphical as this. So I think this works well from that perspective, serving reports to users and giving them that ability then to roll up hierarchies, at least wherever they're available in the data. So that's a feature that's kind of nice. In the case of reports where you have, so here's a report this is actually this is the automated elimination report. So if you are using elimination accounting inside ByDesign, this is not necessarily specific to the Excel add-on. You can run this exact same report into ByDesign, but this gives us a nice way that the system is automatically performing eliminations where it recognizes them. And just a reminder, I don't know if we spoke about this during the last meeting, but if you are looking at eliminations, the system manages eliminations quite nicely when it comes to intercompany journal vouchers, payables and receivables, so resolving any of those intercompany debt. Where it does not work so well is if you have maybe product exchange between two companies. You're selling a product from one of your companies to another, and now you need to eliminate the corresponding cost of goods and the inventory. That's quite complex, so then you may need some topside elimination entries. So in a situation like that, you could now do some of those eliminations manually in Excel and tie that into the report by using formulas outside the grid. So that would be a good use for you to run this report inside Excel. Here's a quick view of a consolidated balance sheet. So same thing, so you've got the advantages here. This one has a lot of rows. So if you want to just sort of instantly run this at a level 4, that's probably a bit more meaningful than at your highest level detail. Nice and easy to collapse by running that report inside Excel. Another example of that elimination reports. I think that's pretty much the same one as before. Another income statement. Just to show you that you could have multiple reports on the same page. So once again, if your data is really dynamic and it's updating every time you come in here and hit the refresh button, you might have situations where things are kind of bumping into each other or having issues like that. I especially find across the columns is an issue. If you stack reports underneath each other, that seems to work out a little bit better. So I don't typically recommend this, but in some cases, if you're running maybe a departmental income statement and you want separate panels for each department or something like that, there could be a use for that. So if you do have something in that nature, that's fine, but I would try and write reports that are stacked top to bottom and try and have them the same column widths. So they're essentially a very mirror image of reports, just maybe analyzing different data sets. That works reasonably well. Here's another report, and this actually probably runs quite a bit better in Excel than it does in ByDesign because of the grid. So one nice thing about ByDesign profit centers is they are just sort of natively driven on a hierarchy because your org structure is hierarchical in nature. So in this particular case, we have got a hierarchy where we might have multiple companies underneath a sort of a shared ownership kind of structure. So in that situation, if I do have profit centers underneath a company which rolls up underneath another company, then I could essentially accomplish an income statement like this, where instead of putting companies in my columns, I'm putting profit centers like I have here. And so what that means is I natively get my company here, but underneath that, I'm getting profit centers that relate to other legal entities all rolling up. So this kind of gives me some more sophisticated consolidation features. In order for this to work, it has to be built into your org structure design. So do keep that in mind. If you're trying to build something like this and your org structure is not configured that way, it won't really work for you. If you are curious kind of about how this works and you want to, unpack this at a greater detail, feel free to reach out to your contact at VistaView, and we could set up, a one-on-one session to discuss more about that. But once again, you've got that nice, simple way to sort of collapse and expand your profit centers. So that's a fairly sophisticated reporting feature in your columns. And here's a situation where I've just created a specific key figure. So key figures is more advanced reporting. We'll likely get into that in a future setting. But if you are creating custom key figures like I have created here, here in column 4. So this represents partial ownership. So one thing ByDesign doesn't really do well is it doesn't have a concept of companies owning a portion of a company. However, if your ownership is fairly straightforward like this, we're saying that 51% of the organization or a child organization is owned by a parent. I've accomplished this in ByDesign by creating a key figure in ByDesign rather than a formula in Excel. So my 51% of 15 million, my 7.9 million, has been calculated by the ERP system. It's a retrievable key figure that's available in my report. And whether you get that information in Excel or natively inside ByDesign in one of their reports, it works the same way. But just wanted to let you know that you can write fairly sophisticated key figures to do things like that. And that's something that definitely belongs, in a financial reporting package workbook where you would be running the reports in Excel. And that's kind of another example of that same elimination balance sheet. So just going back to where we started, this was a GL detail. Just to recap a few things, no problem at any point to add another tab to a worksheet. Whether you want to keep worksheets together in the same workbook, Excel book, or maybe you want to break it out into multiple books if they relate to very different types of reports. But creating a financial package that has a statement of cash flow and income statement, a balance sheet, it's very appealing to create it all in one Excel workbook, like this example we have here. And keep in mind that the other appeal about this is once you've inserted a report, so whatever that report is, if we say a financial statement, and you start invoking your various views and selections. So let's go to our selection. Rather than write one fully, I'm just going to invoke one here. Okay. This combination of this selection and these views are now kind of saved together by virtue of me just updating the Excel workbook. So as soon as I hit save, I now have a combination of this selection and this view, and I would just name my sheet to be meaningful. And I also see that as another advantage over creating, trying to create a report in ByDesign, because the selections and views in ByDesign are never really tied together. They're always sort of just these orphan selections and orphan views. Each time you run this report, you could have a default selection and view that will link together. But in Excel, I can really have an unlimited combination of selections and views linked together by virtue of just building them into this report. And then the Excel spreadsheet remembering that these two things go together. So that's another sort of minor advantage that you have probably over the SAP one. keep that in mind. Of course, you can create dashboards and things like that on your landing pages that combine selections and views and kind of lock them together. But when you are coming to just run them directly out of the system, they won't, it won't necessarily know which one goes with which, because the idea is that you can mix and match these as you want. And while that is advantageous, sometimes it's the disadvantage is once you get a long list of selections and views, you kind of forget which ones go together really well, whereas the Excel workbook does that for you. All right, so I've rambled on for about half an hour there on the main features in this. That's really kind of what I planned to cover for today. So I'm just gonna glance over to the questions panel. I don't see if any questions have, oh wait, there is a question that's come up. Is there a tool to enhance formatting in SAP reports so the formatting will remain static in order to make the report something that you would want to distribute, like financial statements? Yeah, so I think the point that you're making there is when you have this financial statement and you do a bunch of, bolding on things, or you try and do a bunch of formatting, each time it refreshes, you lose, you kind of lose that information, like I just lost that bolding. I unfortunately don't know of a tool or way to do that. I think the only workaround that I have seen is some people will create the financial statement, like the presentation one, as completely an Excel lookup against dynamic data in the system. So for example, rather than me creating a financial report, I could create a GL detail report or a trial balance, probably more likely. And then I could do VLOOKUPs. So I could have an income statement that is all, instead of it being a ByDesign linked report, it's just all VLOOKUPs that are saying, okay, go get the intercompany sales, VLOOKUP it and drop it in here. And then each time you come in to look at this, instead of refreshing this data, you would refresh the trial balance that's feeding this data. So not exactly optimal, because you're going to have to rebuild all the indentations and things that you have here. But once you've built that report once, you would have it. So that's the only workaround I've seen that lets you preserve things like, yeah, being able to put in underlines and formats and things like that. So great question. I wish I had a better solution for it.
So Alex, there's a follow-up question. Where do you go to set up a dashboard report?
Yeah, and I mean, that's probably another whole Q&A cafe on how to create a dashboard. I can show you just really quickly how to get things sort of on your landing pages. So if you're on your well, let's take maybe a landing page that's relevant. So if you're in your general ledger overview and you want to, build out a dashboard here that has some reports, you would do that by going into your personalization mode. So by clicking on the heading there, click OK. Just acknowledges you're going into this personalization mode. And then when you click on the plus sign here, you can add to your dashboard these widgets, which are essentially like shortcuts to actions and tasks that you need to do, which are considered quick links, or you can do reports. If you go into reports here, then you get all of the reports in the system. So you're definitely going to want to know what your report is called so that you can search for it. And so you can see I already have my GL account line items there. So if I want to add another one of those, I would click apply, and then it's going to create my panel. And then from in there, I would go into my settings. And then I have some decisions like, okay, do I want this to be narrow or wide? So let's make it wide because maybe there's more information. And now I have the ability to select my selection. So if I wanted to take my selections of all my 5XX accounts that I wrote at the beginning of this selection, and I wanted to combine this with let's just say profit center columns, and hit apply. This is now kind of a dashboard report where I have married together a selection and a view. Every time I come in here, it'll be refreshed based on the rate that I've set up. So maybe more than once a day, and maybe I want it hourly refreshed. Or I can hit the refresh button there. And if you do make any changes like that, do remember to hit the save button before you exit personalization mode. So I'm going to go out of personalization mode, gets rid of all of that. And now I sort of have this permanent little dashboard on here. This works really well for like aging reports, like you want to see your top 5 customers or your top, oldest invoices, things like that. Maybe a GL detail report like this isn't as meaningful, but it gives you an idea how to do the mechanics. So do all the building of your selection of views in your reports, and then you marry them together here. Beyond that, I think Laura has done some other sessions, so they're probably on our YouTube video about creating more sophisticated dashboards and key performance indicators, things like that. So feel free to look for some of those other sessions to get into a bit more sophistication on what you can do here than what I've just kind of shown you quick and dirty.
All right, there's one other.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just seeing it. Sometimes hard to find field names. Is there a list of fields and their definitions for ease of pulling in the data that you want? Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think regardless of whether or not you're working inside the Excel or the reports itself, so something that could be useful, let's go to that GL detail report because, oops, if you spell it right, actually I'm just gonna go to my priority reports. I really like that feature, so you can flag a report as priority. So yeah, when you're dealing with a report like this that has a ton of available fields, there isn't probably a great way to sort of tie back a field from a form to knowing what it is in here. That unfortunately just takes a little bit of experience and learning over time and experimentation. It's nice in like SAP's more junior product like Business One. You could actually hover over a field inside, like let's say an AP invoice, and it would tell you the specific field name. ByDesign doesn't really have that visibility of their data constructs available to you. You should also be aware that under the configure here to add fields, you can also get access to all of the fields organized more by data set. And in here, you'll also see fields that aren't even necessarily available in the pop-up there. So this can be another way to maybe find fields. So if you know the field that you want is related to business partners specifically, you can at least get to that data set. And then from there, kind of drill down and say, okay, at least now I'm only looking at fields that relate to the business partner. And then if there is a specific field that you want, like let's say it's the country, and this box is not checked, that's telling you that it's not even available in the selection. So I could, I could add it to my selection as well. I can click OK. And then it's going to add it not only to the report, we'll just give that a second to pop in. And there's country, so it's now been added to my selection. So the business partner country is a field that I can actually search on and filter. So I know that wasn't exactly your question, but that's one way to kind of help you at least track down those fields. Is there a field that represents GL transactions or that presents GL transactions, debits and credits combined? Yes, there is. So when you're in your view and you go to your key figures, click on your column settings and expand your key figures. So most of the reports that are GL driven have the ability to have the debit and credit, but also the balance. So if you choose balance, company currency, you can get rid of these or you can leave them on, it's up to you. But now I'm getting the same data in a combined column as a positive or a negative. And that balance is not a rolling balance, it is just the balance for that journal entry. So effectively, that's what you're asking for. It's the total of those, or it's the consolidation of those two fields. And I get that question a lot because that's what accounts are usually looking for. So where do you go to set? I think, have I missed any questions there, Kayla?
Yeah, we had one earlier on. It said, can you select a field from the view list and add it as a selection?
Yeah, and actually I did just cover that. So that's how we got this country field. So yeah, sorry, I didn't even see that question, and I ended up answering it when I was answering the other question. So that's the one way to do it. Also, if you are up here in the selections, you can click on the sort of, you can kind of group them. So which are the ones that are selected into your report and which are the ones that are available. And this gives you, that full list of available ones in your system. So chances are you'll find them all there. If it is not showing, then just remember, you go into your add fields, and then any one of your fields where you want it to be available in the selection, you have to go in here and invoke it on this one, and it'll move it into the panel. So that's a great question. Thank you.
And one last one. The question is if you can do that in the Excel.
I think if you've done it in there, can you do it in the Excel? Yeah. That's actually a good question, and I'm not sure I've ever been asked that. So it's kind of looking like you can't. So yeah, I don't see a way to bring that over from the other side. Let's just double check that. Yeah, those particular advanced settings, like these panels up here, are not available in the Excel. So I believe the answer to that is no. There's no way to start adding it to the selection from the Excel report. All right, well, great participation. I really appreciate all of the questions. If there's other questions that come to mind, once again, feel free to reach out to your account executive. Or you can always get a hold of me directly, but we're happy to kind of help expand your knowledge or your learnings in the Excel reporting or any other areas of ByDesign. We're also always on the lookout for new subject ideas, so feel free to forward those to Kayla, because they go into onto a whiteboard, and then we just kind of go through them as we can and try and get them all booked out once we have a subject matter expert available. So I think that's it for me, Kayla. If there's no other questions from the attendees, I'll pass it back to you.
Great, thanks, Alex. Yeah, there's no more questions there for today. So we'll see you next Wednesday, June 24th for Workflow in ByDesign. And please register either in the auto email that you'll get in 2 days from this session, or you can go to our resources page and check out all what we have available for the next coming weeks. So thank you so much, and see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.